Welcome back to the Library Wanderer. Today we come back with a fresh new spotlight, this time on Dr. Nepalwala, one of the few Indians who write for the library. He began writing for the library back in 2021 and has made enormous growth since that first story. Speaking of that first story, however, let us begin with it. The book is covered in powdered gray ash. Ashes. There are many who consider the paradise to be a safe haven, a place far from the hateful clutches of Kulipoth, where people could live without any fear. Still, people needed to survive somehow, so many would go to the wasteland outside the paradise to find valuables. Raja wandered through it now, searching for valuables scattered here and there, walking through damaged buildings and past broken vehicles as he searched for anything, really. Suddenly he noticed a corpse. It was wearing rather royal clothes and held a chest in its lifeless hands. Raja gently approached the corpse and pulled the chest away. Opening it, he found a small gemstone glowing with a red aura as he held it up to examine it. He turned back, thinking to himself, maybe this is enough for today. As he looked around, he noticed other scavengers also looking for valuables, so he began to walk. Walking right through the market, keeping the stone hidden under his cloak to stop someone from stealing it, he saw all sorts of creatures. He rushed into a store where he placed the stone in front of him. A little winged creature landed on the counter.
"Hey, young man,"
the creature asked, flapping his bat-like wings.
"Who are you?"
"Only a mere scavenger," Raja answered, adjusting the cape to hide his face from the flickering creature.
"Fine. What do you have for sale?"
the creature asked. Raja pointed to the gem.
"Ah, quite a rare piece. 3,000, okay?"
Raja nodded, sliding the stone forward. "Here." The creature opened a counter, took out 3 notes and handed them to the boy. Raja accepted the money, stashed it in his pocket, and returned to the street. Walking home, he was careful to avoid any trouble. When he finally arrived, he noticed his father's car parked nearby. He checked it. The doors were firmly shut. He sighed. The boy entered the old house, looking around at the aged, damp walls. He put the coins on the table, then went to the kitchen to heat up the porridge left from last night. Suddenly, he heard someone knocking at the door. "Yes?" A tall creature in black robes was standing behind the frame as Raja opened the door. It stared at him silently for a moment before handing Raja a small pot. He accepted it, and the creature left. "Rahul," Raja said as he entered the bedroom. A 5-year-old was sleeping on the bed. "Get off the bed, sweetie," he said, shaking the child awake. He looked back with sleepy eyes, saying nothing. "Rahul, it's time to go." Rahul watched the pale gray sky outside the car window as Raja drove them up the hill. He looked to Raja at the wheel, then to the pot in the dashboard. Taking it in his hands, the child grazed it softly with his hands. Its ceramic surface had an embossed design of gilt leaves. "Don't you break it or open it," Raja complained, trying to keep his eyes on the road. Curious, Rahul opened it anyway. "Hey!" he yelled, suddenly hitting the brakes, and unfortunately, some ash escaped and fell on Rahul's clothes. "What are you doing?" Raja snatched the pot and lid from the boy, placing it back on the dashboard.
"Papa,"
the little boy said quietly. "Leave him alone," Raja said firmly. "The last thing I want is to have his ashes squandered here." He tried to start the engine. Nothing happened. "Damn it!" Both of them got out. Raja looked around while smoke rose from the engine. Where are those crabs when you need them? He sat down, resigned, at the base of a big tree.
Whoa, what is this place?
Raoul exclaimed happily, staring up at the enormous hills. Birds were tweeting, and animals of all shapes and sizes were visible at the edge of the tree line. As they waited, Raoul became bored.
Where are we going?
He asked. To the waterfall where Papa used to take us, Raja replied. The boy lay down, resting his head on his elder brother's lap. Raja leaned back against the tree and began to stroke Raoul's hair.
Papa, who is he?
Raja asked as his father put the baby on the bed. As he approached, the infant began to cycle his legs in childish bliss. I found him near the market. Looks like his family abandoned him. He looked at Raja. Raja, shall we keep him? Asked his father. Raja nodded joyfully. We can be his new family.
Yes, my brother,
he said, picking up the child.
Hello, little brother.
A metallic noise startled Raja awake. A crab was standing beside the vehicle, taking tools from a bag as it began its repair work. At last! Raja noticed Raoul had fallen asleep. Picking him up carefully so he wouldn't wake, Raja carried the child to the car and laid him down in the back seat. After half an hour, the crab finished fixing the car. It immediately began to hurry away along the road. Hey, Raja called after it. Thank you. The two brothers exited the car as it arrived at the waterfall. Raja carrying the pot of ashes. Sunlight illuminated the water droplets like falling pearls. On the opposite side, a group of small rodent-like creatures were drinking water from the rocks. Together, they quietly entered the stream. Raja opened the lid and looked down at the ashes. Sir, spare money, please, Raja pleaded, but the people on the street just ignored him. He looked down to his empty bowl and sighed. Looks like I will sleep hungry again, he said to himself as he rose to his feet to leave. Later, he found a darkened alley and lay down. He wrapped his blanket around himself, and he tried to sleep. His stomach growled. Hey, kid. Raja opened his eyes as he saw an older man leaning over him. What are you doing here all alone? The young boy gripped his blanket tighter. Who are you? My name is Alok. Are you hungry? Yes, Raja answered plainly. Let's go then. The older man picked him up, and Raja did not resist. Back at Alok's old, decaying house, he placed the boy into a chair. Where are your parents? Alok asked. Raja looked down, ashamed. What's wrong? My parents were in great debt, so they left me here, Raja answered, his stomach growling again. Mister, just give me dinner, then I will leave. No, Alok said, as he kneeled down and held the child's hands. You can stay here. I will take care of you. Raja raised an eyebrow. Really? Yes, really, Alok assured the boy. I am all alone. I would like some company. Besides, you can leave whenever you want. Deal? He extended a hand. Raja smiled as he shook it. 4 years later, Raja came to Alok with a piece of embroidered cloth. Papa, the boy announced proudly, I made this. Very good, his father replied, patting the boy's head. Thank you, he said as he sat back down on the chair opposite Alok. He watched his father as he wrote something on a sheet of paper. Papa, I have a question. What is it, son? Papa, you see, everyone has a mama and papa. I also had them before, well, where are your mama and papa? Alok turned his face downwards in silence.
No pictures or...
Raja looked at his father, sadness welling inside him.
Papa?
Alok spoke quietly. I don't know.
What?
Raja tilted his head. I don't remember where I came from, Alok said bitterly. I do remember, though, before I came here, I had a younger brother. His name... Oh, God.
Papa,
said the boy, reaching out to embrace his father.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine, sweetie, he said as he patted the boy's head. We have each other, right? Right, Papa. Raja sighed as the ashes fell, mingling with the water, and as the current carried them away. As he looked at Raoul weeping, he dropped the pot into the stream. Raoul hugged him tightly.
Papa,
the little boy said softly as he fell on his knees, splashing the water around him as he began to sob loudly. Raja tried to console him. Back home, the brothers sat together at the old dining table. Raja looked around the house in grief, and his eyes fixed on a cloth and basin at the corner. It was the one they used for Alok when he was ill before he died.
what are we going to do now?
Asked Raoul.
Without Papa, scavenging won't bring enough.
I'll get a job, Raja said, embracing the boy. No need to worry, we have a future. Later, Raja put his sleeping brother to bed and returned to the living room. Sitting down in his father's rocking chair, he noticed the basin again. Alok coughed badly as Raja changed the cloth on his forehead. Their father lay on the bed as Raoul stood back beside his brother. Papa, you will be fine. As Alok looked at Raoul, the ill man smiled weakly.
Papa,
the little boy said as he sat close to his father, tears beginning to form in his eyes.
Papa.
Looks like I don't have any strength left now, Alok said. His sons glared back at him. Papa, don't say this, please, Raja scolded. You will be okay. I have brought the medicines. I am leaving everything I ever earned for both of you, Raja, my son. The boy leaned forward, tears falling from his eyes. Yes, Papa. Take care of your brother, Alok said, pulling affectionately at Raoul's cheek. And you, don't harass your brother.
I promise, Papa,
the child replied. Alok took a deep breath before speaking again. I am happy that I have sons like you. He went silent, succumbing to the illness. Raoul hugged his brother as both began to weep. Papa, Raoul wept. I told you that I would take care of him, but I don't know if I can. He covered his face with both hands. I can't. I will ruin his life. Son. He looked up as he saw his father standing in front of him. My boy. Papa? Raja got up, rubbing his eyes. No, it can't be. Stop dreaming, idiot. My boy. Alok stepped forward into the light of the room. Raja hesitated, but then hugged him as he started crying. Why did you leave us? I can't do this. He shut his eyes. I can't be a father to Raoul, not like you or to me. Son. Alok faced the young man, holding his hands before him. I know this is very hard for you, but frankly, this was inevitable. One day you will have to live without me. I know, but he... Raj's voice shook as he spoke. You know, when I first came here, I knew nothing. Alok walked to the window. I slept on the footpaths. I did all kinds of odd jobs. Some jobs for which I hate myself till this day. That's why, when I first found you, I decided that I would not allow you to suffer like that. So, I brought you here. It wasn't easy, though. Huh? I doubted whether I could be a good guardian for you. I worried that I might end up making your life even more difficult. But here we are now. Alok smiled as he wiped Raj's tears away. I know you will take care of your brother, even better than me. Just have faith in yourself. Yes, Papa, Raja replied, relieved to hear his father's words. I promise. I will take care of him. Thank you, son, Alok said. Then his image slowly began to fade. Papa! Raja tried to grab him, clutching only empty air. Don't leave me alone! I love you. Raja watched a thin layer of ash settle onto the floor. What? He knelt down and touched some with one finger, examining it. Am I going insane? Suddenly Raoul cried out from the other room. As Raja went in, he found the boy shifting uncomfortably in his bed, a look of unease all over him. Raja sighed. Another nightmare? And walked over to sit beside his brother. He placed a comforting hand over the child's head. Here, sleep in bliss. The child calmed as Raja smiled down at him. I promise you, brother, I will take care of you. He watched Raoul return to peaceful sleep. A wonderful story of responsibility and loss. Now let us move to the next story. It has Vitalis LLC written on the cover. Notice, timekeeping. Notice. To all new workers, first of all, welcome to Vitalis LLC, the place where you work tirelessly for nothing. If you are wondering how we keep track of time, no need to look around. We will educate you how. It's simple. We use MLC, million lever cycles done by poor Jerome. This is the unit of time we use here. Currently, at the time of printing of this notice, 27 MLC has passed. Consider them as the days of this place, with each cycle having roughly 200,000 cycles of the lever. We also use Jerome years, though the exact number of years is debatable. Few workers have volunteered to be timekeepers. You can approach them to ask the time. If you want to volunteer, we welcome you to do so. Just contact the undersign. Clipper, Chief Timekeeper. And a footnote here. History. It is said that at 0 MLC, Jerome led a workers' revolution against sovereign Balkashaz. While the event was legendary, the revolution failed, which led to him being damned to pull and push the lever of the eternal machine tirelessly. Eventually, everyone, including the workers and sovereigns, began to use his punishment as a standard of time, since the realm does not change visibly. I always do enjoy the Vitalis series, and this time was no different. But let us move on to the next book. The first in a 3-part series about a person named Ojhi. Ojhi and the Land of Orthothans. The Orthothan Artifacts Reclamation Mission. Landhack Chapter. The following are 2 scrolls found inside a library in the ruins of Ojhi, the former capital of the Earthen Orthothan Kingdom, situated 19 kilometers from Kargil, Ladakh, India. On February 13th, 1945, during the 9th Archaeological Mission. The following scroll describes events that seemingly are not part of the canonical Orthothan texts. Scroll 1. Hundreds of millions of solar lifetimes ago, there was a race of godlike beings called the Noctan. Majestic creatures were rivaled by none. They were the masters of this part of the Hytoth and were all across the universe. Until 500,000 years ago, however, they faced extinction, and only a very small number were left. They broke away, either finding solace in solitude or forming cults. Soon after, these cults spread throughout the universe, with some hunting down civilizations, destroying their works, and torturing inferior people for sadistic pleasure, while others changed their creatures because they were gods. Some allowed their automata to go berserk, terraforming planets against the will of their natives, or making new artificial intelligences, like one who hunted for sport. But their trespassing was not tolerated for too long. The Koru Tusa and the army of Orthothans defeated the Noctan, but many of them and their vicious automata left their part of the cosmos. Many settled in other parts of the universe and continued their work. One of the cults even gathered various races and stitched them together into a single sentient moon that sings praises for them in their agonized voices of trillions of damned souls. Others created temporal pockets, hellish in nature, as they pushed the natives of a galaxy into them to be burned for eternity. The Orthothans tried to intervene, but they tore a hole in the universe, allowing the Voru to pour in. While the Orthothans were busy driving the Voru away, the Noctans carried on their evil deeds. Even now they are roaming around the universe, and their automata are serving their masters. The second scroll, and unlike the first one, is written in a non-critical tone. The scroll has been subjected to censorship by words being painted over, using black ink, which is quite uncommon for the Earthen Orthothan Kingdom, where censorship is seen as a taboo. Scroll 2. This is the record of the Noctan group, the Hand of Progress. The group were founded by the Noctan, who dwelled in the galaxy of Morar, in the Cove of Death. Morar was a dead galaxy back then, with life absent from every planet except one. The Hand found the planet's dominant species were ape-like creatures, full of fur and the ones that dwell in the night. The species, however, disappointed the Hand. They were sinners, and thus the Hand wiped them out. Then they chose another race, a perfect one. The Hand named them Censored, and spread them across the dead galaxy. The Censored dwelled on 1,000,000 planets, evolving into different cultures. The Hand wanted them to evolve naturally. They built sentinels to protect the galaxy from the invaders and the automata of their estranged brothers. But some weren't happy. They wanted Censor to prosper, and they would only prosper if they had the same technology the Noctans had. And thus, the small group of people who named themselves the Hand of Prosperity gave the knowledge to our ancestors, the people of Censored, on the continent of Censored, in the original home world of Censored. The rest of the Hands, however, were not pleased. They feared that we would develop pride and enslave our brethren as our gods did. However, our leader, Censored, convinced them that we wished no harm to others, and thus they allowed us to keep our knowledge. They gave Morar to us to protect it against any threats. For everyone's well-being, we hid our continent on our true homeworld, and made a facade of a giant ocean. The hand eventually left Morar, spreading our brothers throughout the cove and assisting the Noctan in their war against the demons. Ever since then, we have been like this. It was like any other day of my work, finding artifacts and cataloging them for prosperity. I was inside my tent, reading about whatever we had found out till now, and what more we were expected to find soon.
Mr. Rudolph, check this out!
Lee entered the tent, his excitement dispersing a positive aura into the environment and holding 2 scrolls inside platinum tubes. He is one of the most excited people on this earth. No matter how mundane things are, he will be damn excited. He stood before my desk and opened the scrolls.
See this? What do you think?
He gave the paper to me.
The original ones were too frail, but I rewrote them here.
Interestingly, I said. Let me look at them more closely.
Of course, Mr. Rudolph.
The man said this with politeness before he left. I too decided to take a small walk for some fresh air, and left the tent with the paper. The entire ruins were covered in trees and moss, the last testament to Earth's first civilization, even if it was a result of alien intervention, was found. I took the scrolls and began walking towards the structure C3. That is the place where a person would read, a library. The building no longer had that roof. The tables and chairs already rotted away millennia ago, and she was not here anymore. I sat on the broken floor. The mountain mist was chilling my spine, albeit not for the first time in my life. Of around 15,000 years. I began to read again. I mostly looked at the redactions. Ikar was right. The Orthothans really got pissed off looking at this. Fortunately, or maybe not, the current ones know next to nothing about the true name of the galaxy, considering that the Earth is at the edge of the unknown part of the galaxy, and, for now, messengers are coming directly from outside the galaxy. I was reading and looking around the ruins. For some unknown reason, I could not help but remember what this place once was. The memories flowed in. It was 13,002 BC. I was a fresh graduate in history when I got recruited by the Hand of Security, the organization meant to protect humans in the galaxy, though its operations have eventually deflated to around the Sol by now. I was chosen to accompany the High Counselor, Merer Ura, to Landron, the first human civilization, for a diplomatic mission. In the morning, I had my breakfast and got ready for the trip. I went to Scholar Ikar to collect the Scroll of Wark-Sin, one of the most important Orthothan scrolls in literature. It was meant to be a gift to the Orthothans.
Here,
he gave me another scroll while he was trying to keep his amusement down.
I wrote this one. Orthothans may like this.
He gave a mischievous smile. Ikar was that person who tried to be funny, only to end up becoming a complete moron. I took it anyway, just as I realized that I was late. I began to run, hugging the scrolls. After all, being late on the first day when you are on a mission with a High Counselor would have a great impression on the rest of my career. I finally reached and was panting as the counselor looked at me with a stern look. "I'm sorry, sir." I bowed down, begging the person to not send me back. I felt a pat on my back.
You have arrived. That is everything. Let's not make those Orthothans wait,
Mirror said as he began to walk, as I tried to follow him. But I was so tired. He noticed it.
Are you coming with me, or do you have other plans?
Yes, sir. I looked at his stern face. I knew what was coming next.
You are 25 years old. You youngsters are becoming lazier and lazier.
I silently looked at him.
Who am I blaming? Your so-called old people are youngsters. You all live a life of luxury. Automata are there to serve your needs. When I was your age, I would herd cattle. Do you know how difficult that is? I still remember it as if it was yesterday.
I and others sometimes feel amused whenever the members of the High Council ranted about how their current generation is worse than the previous one. The fact that all members of the High Council are at least 200 or 300 years old, dating back to when Morar still had a Nuktan presence, when there was a fatherly figure for humanity. The oldest man, apart from the councillors, is only 9,000 years old, with many opting for death by the 300th year of their life. Still, old men love to rant about younger men, and high councillors must have also faced the same thing. Well, we walked for another 10 minutes till we finally reached our destination. In front of us was a rust bucket, or, in an elegant way, an aircraft from the antediluvian days. Figure of speech, the ship was even older than that. "Will we go into that?" I asked Mirror, but I knew the answer, even though I wished for the opposite to happen.
Yes.
And my fear was confirmed. We sat inside. For a rust bucket, it was well maintained. It was outdated, though, and needed to be manually controlled. The ship lifted off, and we began to fly towards the sky. I looked through the back camera. The land was visible, till at a point it vanished. Only a huge ocean was visible by now. The aircraft was flying on its way. I took a deep sigh of relief. Mirror tossed an audio player to me.
"Play something nice,"
he ordered. As I did. The aircraft was filled with music as I looked out at the sky. We landed on the balcony of a temple, and people immediately surrounded us. Many of them were simply there to see outsiders, considering that, on Earth, they were the only places with some civilization. Other places were unchanging savage lands at that time. We stepped down as people tried to rush to us, to touch us, to see if we really were the outsiders they were told about. The first civilization on the Earth was before me. There has been a lot of debate in the galaxy about humanity's origin, with most believing that humans are seemingly omnipresent, while a few rightfully believe that humans have a true birthplace. Earth is a mysterious planet filled with gods and pure human civilizations, waiting for its brothers to find them. Several people throughout history have bravely ventured into uncharted space or even to the galactic core in search of this homeworld, and entire religions have been built on this half-myth, as have several novels, dramas, and films. The fact that its first civilization was, in fact, built by an alien, and that too late, would be considered a disgrace to humanity as a whole. Some guards escorted Mirror away, while I was taken to the library to deliver the scroll. The library was huge. It was the largest building in the whole city, second only to the royal palace. The library was filled with scholars reading from the books. It was not different from Olam, except the entire thing is virtual, with people clicking on the link to get a virtual book. A young man was sitting at the reception as I went there. He was lost in his thoughts as I tapped on the table. "Huh?" He looked at me and said, "What can I help you with?" He asked while sitting, before he awkwardly stood up. Sorry. "Well, I spoke as the translator attached to my throat translated my words. I am an emissary from the Olam. I'm here to... I took the scrolls out and give them back. He gently took it and slid it onto a rack beneath the table. Yami! He called someone as I looked in the direction. Seconds later, I was in awe. A beautiful woman, maybe 25 years old, came out wearing a simple light blue dress. For some reason, she looked like the receptionist. This is the outsider, you remember?
Yes, Hala.
She looked at me.
Greetings, mister.
She bowed.
Welcome to our library. My family, for the last 2 centuries, has maintained this place as its caretakers.
I bowed back as a gesture of respect. My name is Ojhi, and I'm here with one of the members of our High Council, Ura. I introduced myself as she smiled.
My name is Yami, and he is my brother, Hala,
she said before glaring at him and elbowing him. Oh, yeah, Hala. My name is Hala. He gave a small bow. There is some work left, pardon me. And he left as Yami looked at me.
We were told that someone important was coming. Would you like a tour of the city?
She asked me. I gave a nod, since Mur would take aeons to interrogate the messenger about how he even managed to get past the sentinels. The entire city was filled with life. Even now, when I look at these ruins, I imagine people walking down the streets, children buying snacks and playing around, donkeys carrying loads around. The city was made from stones and bricks, yet some alien technology and magic were present, like piped water, steam-powered motors, and mills.
My great-grandparents' tribe arrived here from the Central Plains,
Yami said, as my attention was diverted to her.
Our tribes were hunters, hunting wild animals. One day, a drought occurred, and we arrived here. My grandmother was 17 years old when she married the son of the chief librarian. Yeah, even after being part of the family of librarians, after my grandmother, we take pride in our hunting heritage. You should come and see how many beasts my father killed in the southern forests. What about your parents?
Well, they were nobodies, you know? People who tended to just survive. I lied. I was born in the year 13028 BC in Olam, raised by automata till the beginnings of my puberty. My all needs were met by them. I never had a family, since the very concept of family was lost in the Olam tens of millennia ago. People are highly individualistic, and relationships are only made with equals. The High Counselors, being the preserve the old age men, made marriage a sacred duty. But when people ignored it, they then made it compulsory that each man and woman in the Olam have to give birth to at least one child, lest the entire continent collapse due to under-ambitions. People had children and adopted them out, then ended up in orphanages, since children were considered an obstacle by parents' ambitions. Things went on. Orphanages became collective houses where children spent their childhood. I am unaware of who my parents were until now. Mirror did warn that this practice is treated like an abomination by almost every other human civilization. That's why I lied. I was unsure how she would take this.
Oh, well, that's okay.
She smiled again.
Many people prefer an ordinary life.
True. So, Hala, to hunt? I asked, only to hear her giggle in return.
Pardon? Hala can't even kill a fly, but my cousin, Tarun, is going to become one. He usually remains in the tribe with our uncle and, once a year, come back here with great trophies. He is very skilled for a 16-year-old.
Do you hunt? I asked curiously, and she gave a nod again.
Yeah, I hunted a huge beast down. Well, it was a group hunt, but I gave the killing blow. It was a huge furry one.
She raised her hands to show the size.
Maybe as large as this house.
The houses she pointed to was 2-story tall and had big tusks. Mammoths, that's what they're called now. We continued as we saw many trinkets being sold in the market. Among the most popular items are pottery, gemstones, and decorations made from animal skins and bones. The Mountain Kingdom did have a variety in its culture and skills. I saw idols of Koru Tensu being sold, with one of Yoren Lasan being the best seller. Storytellers were narrating the stories of Orthothans and their deeds in the town square. Eventually, we sat on a bench, drinking some salty milk and watching a puppet drama.
So, Ojhi,
She asked.
how is your homeland?
Well, I rubbed the backside of my head.
Olam is a great place. There is no hunger or death. No death?
She was shocked.
Death is inevitable.
No, death is a commodity for us. People choose when they die.
Why, feeling jealous?
I poked her shoulder, expecting her to make some excuse.
No, I feel pity for you.
Her answer confused me.
Why? The fact that you could die at any time adds to the intrigue of life. I believe that immortality is boring and should not be opted for.
Anyone would say that, but she was correct. The reason people gave up nearly every 300 years is that they felt tired. Tired to the point that they opt for death. I, too, understand now. Living among others and seeing them die, only to be replaced by their successors, is painful. Someday, Li would die too, and I would continue. How do the High Counselors feel? Their generation is long since a forgotten history, and yet they continue for the Noctan. I don't know.
Well then, I guess the meeting must be done now,
She said as I looked at the sky. It was already past noon. We both got up and began to walk back to the temple. On our way, we stopped at a pottery shop. Yami took a toy elephant up and showed it to me.
How is this?
Nice, I answered. She then turned back to the shopkeeper and paid her some coins.
Here.
She gave it to me.
Thank you. It is beautiful.
We walked on and eventually reached back. Mirror was standing outside with a few guards. I approached him as Yami left after waving goodbye. Our work is done here. He gave a satisfied look. The alien is harmless, so we have decided to let him continue his work.
Well then, let's leave, sir, shall we?
Mirror remained silent for a few moments. That being said, we need someone here to continue reporting his activities. What if he has some ulterior motives? So, he rested his hand on my shoulder. You will stay here and report anything of interest.
As you order, Mirror. But where will I live?
I asked. I have told them that you will stay here, as you have requested to learn more about them. He told me, and then left without answering my question. I sighed. There was very little I could have done anyway. I went back to the library. Hala was snoring at the reception table like a lion, while Yami was arranging some books.
Ojhi!
She called my name and came to me.
What are you doing here?
Well, I guess Mirror left me here. I chuckled nervously. Can you help me find a place to stay?
Well, I guess we need a helper here, so you can work here, and we can give you a room for you.
Later, she talked to her father, the chief librarian, and got me the job of janitor. I would arrange the books for the patrons to take them away. Sometimes, during my free time, I would read some of their books. It was mostly okay, books made from vellum on different stories, and the Orthothan religion. Sometimes Yami would help me with work or read me books. Once a month, everyone in the city would gather at the main square as the religious leaders would give sermons, and people would offer blood to the guardians. Though the Starfallen messenger would never come out of the palace. Maybe the environment of the earth was not suitable for him. Time went on. I would just make audio logs and send them to Olam. I was sure no one was listening. Things went on peacefully. Slowly, I and Yami began to grow closer and closer, though I sometimes doubted if we even had a future together. Then, on the day devoted to Rakmao Leo-san, a festival was organized. At the market, traders from other parts of the kingdom and tribes like the one Yami belonged to arrived, bringing their trophies for sale, tiger skins, elephant tusks, and exotic animals I had never seen before, all for sale. Yami and I were sitting in a silent corner of the marketplace, observing the glittering sky.
Today the sky is more beautiful, right?
Yami asked as I gave a nod.
So, is it true that there are more people like us outside this planet?
Yeah, there are. But none are coming here for the next 1,000 years, so you are all safe here.
Yeah.
She looked down at the ground. I continued to gaze at the night sky.
Hey, Ojhi, tell me something.
Yes? I looked at her face. It was filled with uneasiness.
How long are you here?
I don't know. Maybe a few years? She gave a slight nod.
Well, do your people accept outsiders?
No. Practically, there was no outside contact at that time and later. A strict policy of isolationism had taken to not let our technology get into others' hands.
Well then, I hope our companionship will last for long.
I smiled at her wish. We both continued to chatter on different topics till it was very late. We then went back. Time passed by as we grew closer to each other. We would joke and sometimes bully Hala. Yami's family would ask dozens of questions about Olam, and I would answer, though I would tell half-truths. After 5 years, I recall as the council decided to leave the kingdom alone. That time, in the courtyard of the temple, I saw her for the last time. She was smiling, but she was in agony too. Just like me as I boarded the ship. I had returned home after a 5-year absence. I entered my room and sat. Outside the window were the tall silver buildings, and at my table a silver pen, a mug, and a tablet. I smiled and put the elephant Yami gave me in my room. I began to stare at it, smiling at the gift given to me by my beloved. As time went by, small civilizations began to sprout across Asia and the Sinia, as the earthen Orthothan kingdom saw a rise and decline. Borders shrunk and expanded, and eventually they started to fracture. Soon enough, after 100 years, the Starfallen messenger disappeared. I went back, disguised as a traveler. Not much changed as I went to the library. At the reception was a young man. I talked to him and learnt that he was Yami's great-grandson. She eventually married someone else and lived a good life. I was satisfied that she got the life she wanted. As I continued returning to the city, the culture evolved, and new gods, along with Karu Tessi, were being worshipped. Then came that day. 2,000 years after my first visit, the Sarnites, one of the founding tribes of Daevas, attacked the kingdom. I was there as their spirit beasts ransacked the capital. tore down the royal palace, and burned the royal library to the ground. People fled deeper into the mountains, and then the city never came back to life. Years went by and became decades. Decades became centuries, and centuries became millennia. The buildings crumbled under their own weight, and eventually, the world's first civilization was forgotten. Eventually, I became busy with other civilizations, the Mechanites and Daevites in particular. There was so much to learn that I ended up extending my life to the point that I am the oldest man in the Olam, apart from the High Counselors. I still wish I could come here more often. Eventually, Orthothans rose up and started looking for the famed Earthen Orthothan kingdom. I joined them as a fellow Orthothan, and eventually, they found this place on their own.
Rudolph, Sahib, night is coming. We must leave now.
Tenzin, our native guide, said while standing on a ruined wall.
There are many beasts hunting at night.
Yeah. I got up and rolled the paper up, then began walking to the bus that brought us here. I reached near the entrance, and my eyes caught something. A headless statue was a few meters away from us, with a grave behind it. It was strange, since I had never seen it before. I asked Tenzin about it. He answered that it was a graveyard for a local Anglo-Indian community. Though the ruins were safe, very few people ever wanted to go there, due to rumors and myths surrounding them. I gave a sigh before boarding the bus. A graveyard in the graveyard of a civilization with its statue too, decaying. How time flies. I was seated next to Lee, as he was still in an excited mood. I never understood why he was so positive.
Mr. Rudolph, did you hear? Our expedition is extended for another year.
Why? I asked, since this was supposed to be our last day.
We found some interesting relics from the first messenger himself. We will have to investigate.
I gave a simple nod. Even though I didn't know what he had left there, I was curious to find out. As the bus started moving, I looked back at the ruins for a last time. The temple, the houses, and that library. Everything was gone now. Only ruins were left. And there she was, smiling and waving me farewell, like she always does. Yet another story involving loss, but this time of a romantic love. The next book appears to be from an entirely different time period. Ojhi and the Jungle of Daevas, Part 1. Note: following story contains certain topics like slavery, violence, and gore. In the beginning, tens of thousands of years before the reign of Maryada Purushottam Sri Ram, before Sri Krishna revealed the Gita to Arjun at Kurukshetra, at the time when Aryavrat itself was not established by King Bharata, and before Sind discovered agriculture, there were 5 tribes of Deva: Saranari, Mahari, Meghari, Nustani, and Uttastani, each led by a Rajmata married to the Scarlet Maharaja. For many other tribes of Hindustan, they were savages who wielded the power of jinns and used them to wreak havoc on the people. They would sacrifice innocents to their demonic god, to whom they would pray. The 5 tribes would always fight with each other, killing thousands in each fight. However, they were evenly matched. Their plants and beasts were equally matched to each other, and thus they drowned Hindustan into a pool of blood, where it remained for eternity. However, Karki, the Rajmata of Saranari, who lived in the hills of Uttaranchala, was given a revelation by her husband, the Scarlet Maharaja, to march north and defeat a nation led by a Kidir. She did the same and marched to Kashmir and found Astras, unmatched by any other weapons ever built till now. The next time the 5 tribes clashed, Saranari used the Astras and defeated the other tribes, laying them to waste. At Mamjul, home of the Saranari, Karki crowned herself the Rajmata of all other tribes, and thus was born the empire of the Daevas. Despite the Astras being depleted, the Daevas attacked the rest of free Hindustan and ruled the land unopposed. They built great fortress cities and temples for their god, and would sacrifice thousands for him. And so the empire remained the dominant force in Hindustan, and spread its legs in Faras, Buram, and Chin, till they finally found their enemies in the form of the Fuladi army of Meccan from Mysore. From the History of the Daevas, 1698, by Muhammad Shirajullah Khan, the 93rd head of the 9 shields of Ashoka. The aircraft hovered over the dense jungles of Sharian province, or today's Arunachal Pradesh, the fief of Lord Kira of the Mengari tribe, which ruled over the northeast India and Burmese colonies. It was nearly an hour before sunrise, with the moon and the stars illuminating the night sky, while on the ground within the dense jungles, spots of light were visible, indicating the presence of civilization. I looked at the scenery through the monitor while listening to some music.
Ojhi Mana, how much further?
Nir asked me, sitting at the co-pilot's seat, though it was completely autopilot. There was excitement all over his face. I remember my first day with both excitement and fear that I might mess things up somehow. At least he was not traveling with a high counselor in a rust bucket. Just near. We are reaching the largest settlement here. Nir relaxed back in his chair. His eyes looked ahead onto the front window, appreciating the night sky and occasional clouds. Nir relaxed back on the chair, his eyes looking ahead onto the front window, appreciating the night sky and occasional clouds.
Sir, forgive me for asking this, but which place did you serve for your first time?
I smiled at his innocent question, and his fear of offending me. Nir, no need for this much formality. You can just call me Ojhi. And asking about my work is in no way offending me, I assured him. So my first mission was to explore the kingdom of Ladron, nearly 6,000 years ago. It was an enlightening experience, and I know this will be for you too.
Yes, sir. I'm really looking forward to it,
Nir answered. We continued on our path for a few more minutes until we finally reached the landing spot, a kilometer away from the city of Mish, the capital of the province. The ship began its descent among the trees, as we were hailed by Olium through communications. I answered it. Agent Ojhi and Nir. On screen, Merir Yan appeared. He is the youngest High Counselor, reflected by his appearance as a 20-year-old, healthy man compared to the rest of the council, who looked like old men with white hair. His voice was deep but smooth. As you know, you have been sent here to inspect the 3 most powerful tribes of Daeva
and assess their society and their dark magic. Report everything, the fate of these people depends on it.
The communication was terminated on their side. Wasting no time, we geared up with the suit to render us invisible to the Daevites and make observation an easier job. "Ready, partner?" I asked him, causing him to look away in shyness. It was a guess, considering the visor of the helmet was nearly opaque from the outside, but the way he looked away was caused by discomfort.
"Sir, I'm your junior. The word partner has too much respect for me."
He confirmed my suspicions. "Come on, Nier. Don't think of yourself as being so lowly compared to me." We both stepped down from the aircraft, greeted by the greenery around us, filled with the sounds of wild animals and birds. The aircraft started elevating again to fly back to Olam, since our extraction point was at Irnan, a small village in the central plains of China. We were meant to travel the entire distance either on foot or using the flight systems in our suit, though I preferred to go on foot for most of the time. We began walking towards Mish through the branches and moist ground. I was leading ahead, holding a blade and swinging it to cut down any branch that obstructed our path.
"Ojhi Mana, can you explain this for me? What did Mir mean by the fate of these people depends on it?"
Well, Mirror meant if Daevas possessed any capabilities that may threaten Dolium, if they do, then the High Council will send forces to exterminate them.
"What? Why?"
Nier asked me, but before I could answer him, somewhere, someone began screaming in agony.
"What was that?"
"I don't know, nor should it bother us." I suggested we continue our path towards the city. Nier gave a nod, and we were on the move again. After 30 minutes of walking through the jungle, filled with the cries of wild animals and birds, we took our first step inside the city as the dawn broke. From above, the city looked like any other patch of forest, and it did until the Daevas showed up. If we ignore their rampant slavery and human sacrifice, this civilization possessed a horticultural might unrivaled by anyone on Earth. The very buildings were built of trees, not of wood, but of living trees. The Daevas would bloat the trees with their magic and scientific techniques. Each tree was as wide as a regular building in the present day and 3 stories tall. The rooms would be carved inside it, with the mud mixed with various drugs and chemicals to heal the tree. The roads of the city were made from the roots of the house trees and lined with rows of pebbles. Bridges were, again, made with the roots and branches. We engaged the cloaking mechanism of the suit and entered the city. The streets were filled to the brim with Daevites, men and women wearing colorful tunics and ceramic jewelry, including bangles, heavy necklaces, earrings, or a simple tiny rod of gold or silver pierced into the earlobe. Children wore similar types of clothing, except young boys wore nothing above except jewelry. The Daevites had long hair tied together with copper hairpins. However, then there were slaves, the ones who dominated the streets. Their appearance seemingly depended on how their masters treated them. The best of slaves wore a tunic, signifying the favor and trust their master had in them. However, most only had a small brown cloth around their waist, their upper bodies completely naked to signify their status within society. Many had bruises around their bodies, and some had chains around their necks, leashed like dogs by their masters. The shops, like houses, were built from trees, albeit smaller ones, and sold fruits, vegetables, spices, and herbs. Some also sold pottery and animals to be eaten, both domesticated and wild. hunted down by the shopkeeper's slaves. We continued our tour around the city, seeing children playing on the streets and small parks walled by roots. However, they were Daevite children. The slave children would be either lashed to the wall by their parents before going to work, or would spend most of their day inside slave quarters, if the masters were rich, or in a small room. We eventually stopped near a shop and sat on the footpath. There were no benches, and people mostly sat on the ground. On our opposite was an open ground with a stage, also made from the roots and branches of some kind of small flat tree. Several Daevites and their slaves were standing around it, witnessing an event happening.
Ojhi Mana, this place is messed up,
Nir said to me, disturbed.
How can someone be so brutal to someone? Do they even care about these people?
He pointed to the house opposite us, where a slave boy was being held by 2 Daevites, screaming and cursing, but to no effect on others. At that time, I could not understand them, but later, after growing affluent in the language, I understood that the boy was seemingly found guilty of praising Ayun, a former slave and rebel in Zenak Crown Colony, present-day Sichuan province in China. Nir, this is what they are. We cannot judge them. The boy began to shriek while a 3rd Daevite arrived, older than the 2. He held a book made from vellum, which he opened, and started chanting something in a language. It was some kind of clerical dialect of Daevic.
How so, Ojhi Mana? They're making these people their properties, and we are just standing and watching it. Ojhi Mana, we should do something.
Nir tried to get up, but I grabbed his shoulder, forcing him to sit. Nir, we are under strict orders to just observe. The chanting ended. Beneath the boy's feet, roots emerged, crawling their way around his bare body. The boy screamed while Nir, no longer able to see it, tried to get from my grasp, but in vain. Eventually, the roots cocooned him completely, while the Daevites started chanting 2 words, Vepetao. They began to clap and were joined by the crowd, at least the Daevites. The slaves were silent while the boy tried to struggle against the vines, but finally he stopped resisting. Eventually the roots retreated from his body, only leaving a skeleton and an orb of radius of approximately 20 centimeters were left. One of the 2 Daevites next to it picked the bones up and threw them on the ground. The Daevites began screaming at their slaves to pick it up. One couple got the skull of the boy as the man raised it up with joy, joined by his wife. The others who got any bones did the same. The slaves' horror painted all over their faces, powerless as they were, picking the remains of one of their sons.
Is this what we are here to observe? This absolute barbarity? This sorry excuse of human civilization? We should immediately go back to Olam and tell the High Council to exterminate these barbarians.
Nir's anguish lashed on me, but I kept my calm. Slavery does not warrant extermination, and we have just started our journey. Let's observe them for a bit longer, I said, before starting my walk again. Nir, powerless against me, reluctantly followed me. We left the boundaries of the city, with the sun slowly going up over our heads. Our next stop was the city of Druz, lying somewhere near the present-day Nalanda city, which was under the control of the Numani tribe of Daeva. The city served as the capital of Numani territory, comprising much of West India, and also was the site of innovation of the empire. The majority of scholars of horticulture, thaumatology, alchemy, and mathematics resided in the city and developed new technology for the empire. The city also hosted the University of Kalya, where the next generation of intellectuals would be created. We both engaged the flight system in our suits and levitated up into the sky, flying on our way to the city. After an hour of flight over other Daevite settlements and fields, where they would grow barley and other food with their slaves as labor, we landed near the limits of the city. The city of Druz was in many ways similar to Mish. Its houses were built from living trees, though taller and unlike Mish, with only green leaves. Druz's buildings were decorated with flowers, and songbirds lived within its branches and chirped in a pleasant tune. The major population of Druz were made of young men and women who came from all corners of the empire to study. They would wear saffron tunic, in contrast to colorful dresses of the commoners as part of their scholarship. The female slaves wore brown tunic, while men were bare. The streets of Druz were radically different, with long centipede-like giant creatures walking through the roads, loads and people riding on it. There were horses, too, used to travel at distant points of the city, while elephants were reserved for heavy labor and war. Due to its huge size, the very sky above was covered by branches, creating shade on the ground, ideal for the market. The market sold different things, including food, notebooks made from vellum, ink, items used in worship, and other household items.
Let's see the university,
I said to Nir, and began walking to the university while avoiding bumping into anyone. The University of Kalya was built at the center of the city. I theorized that the city was built for the university. It had a huge sprawling campus with a huge dome-like structure made with several oak trees and flowers of the colors red, blue, yellow, pink, etc. The trunks of these trees made the walls, with their tops converging to a single point at the center of the building. The largest dome was at least 9 levels high, with other smaller ones hosting separate departments. Boards made from solid, lustrous resin-like substance, held by a small tree or hung with vines, showed what department or place they were, with names carved in them in Daevic script.
Which place shall we visit first?
I asked Nir. He, however, did not answer me.
Nir?
That.
He spurted quickly and pointed at one of the distant buildings, also one of the smallest. He started walking there, not even looking at me. The university, aside from buildings, mostly had flat grassland where students would sit down to either study or talk with each other. They were joined by their professors, who wore similar saffron cladding, with a red ruby necklace signifying their rank. The university also owned slaves, but unlike others outside, they were fully clad in blue clothes. They were well fed and did odd jobs, as well as being literate, writing down the lectures and other speeches of the professors and copying books. The city of Druz and the entire realm as a whole were kind to their slaves as compared to the other parts of the empire. But the students and faculty here were even more polite to them. Younger students would refer to older slaves with full respect, and professors would even teach younger slaves how to write Daevic. Nir gave an audible sigh of awe as his eyes fell on the interior of the building. The entire interior was made from colorful resin, not just decorations, but the desk, chairs, stairs, and even the covers of some books. The students were always on the move, going to their classes for lectures. We looked into the classes. Students were sitting on mats on the ground, while the teacher sat on top of a tiger-skin mat and would deliver the lecture, which students would both write down as well as repeat line by line in unison. The room itself was devoid of anything except for some books next to the teacher. The room was lit by sunlight coming from the window, as well as a stag-like bug the size of a dog, which Daevites called Urk, resting at the ceiling where its body illuminated, bright enough for the class.
Ojhi mana, does every human civilization start like this?
Nier asked me. Yes. I mean, close enough, you know. Many don't have magic bugs, I said. We continued on our way, going up to the second floor. The resin stairs creaked as we made up, only to be greeted by a foul smell. The entire floor was some kind of lab. The students worked on flesh and animals using sophisticated stone or bone tools. Some students were working under the guidance of their professors, while being assisted by some slaves, while a group was on the far end of the room, working on something. Nier and I reached there and looked at it. It was a structure made from flesh, wood, and crystal, made like a screen. It was connected with a cord made from nerves and muscles, moving out to the other side of the table, where something was there. I walked there and saw it. A sphere with a flat base. There were a set of eyes, looking straight like a predator, maybe a bird. Back at the main part of this biomachine, it was a rectangular slab of flesh with several bones and symbols etched on it. Above it was a covering of an opaque membrane. We both stood behind the group to not bump into anyone. One of the students went to the other side and stood in front of the eyes. Another student stood in front of the machine. The former took a proper position and signaled. The latter inserted his finger into what looked like a hole at the side of the flesh. The membrane started changing colors. Some students held each other's hands, both excited and scared. The membrane continued changing its colors till some part of it started taking a shape. Brown, yellow, orange? The process continued for 7 minutes, till finally a low-detailed image was created. It lacked fine details, but overall was correctly showing the young man's face and clothes. The students were quite disappointed, though getting comforted by their teachers. For me, this was genuinely something I never saw before. Creating an image, using biological components, was something completely alien. There are several human states around the galaxy which use biomechanical tech, but they were only able to achieve that because they had prior knowledge of metallic technology. Daevites were making these from scratch while having no knowledge of metal smelting. After roaming around the city for some time, by night we both went into the forest again and sat on a branch of a tree, away from any human presence. I was sending all information we collected till now and sent it back to Mirror. Nier, however, was silently sitting, lost in his own thoughts. I guess the episode in the university did something to him. Nier, how are you liking your job? He was still lost in thought. Is it boring?
What?
He looked at me in shock.
Ojhi mana, no, of course not. This is a great job.
Of course, I said. What do you think of the university?
Not that fanciful, considering they have slaves.
Nier sighed.
This empire existed for 2-3 millennia by now, and yet they could not progress.
Back at the university, I saw technological progress. Making a camera out of tissues and flesh is something truly remarkable.
But they have slavery and human sacrifice. This kind of progress means nothing.
Nier, my dear friend, you have quite a black and white view of the world. Nations are shades of gray. Nier looked down, bathed gray by the moonlight. The entire day had drained my spirit. Perks of being a young man with a 4-digit age. I took my lighter and a cigarette out of the utility pouch in my suit and lit myself a good smoke. In Nolam, we have our version of tobacco. A blue leafy plant we call Arshamaun. Similar to tobacco, except it is a safer alternative, carrying no risk of cancer. I always wished to plant some trees outside of Olam for Earthlings to try once, but the High Council forbids all kinds of export, even of a plant. The delightful smoke entered my mouth.
You know, smoking is harmful. You can lose everything,
Nera mumbled. All I will lose will be my lungs, for the 275th time. Don't worry about such things and take some. I took another cigarette out and offered it to Nera, but he declined. He remained silent before starting to speak again.
Ojhi Manaha, can you tell me something?
Yes? I puffed a cloud of smoke out.
At the beginning, Mirror said that the fate of these people depended on us. Why is the High Council going so strict on them? What is the reason behind this?
Well, my smoking was done. I threw the butt down into the abyss of the forest as its faint glow got devoured by darkness. People say that 90,000 years ago, a civilization like this one existed on a planet. They too were human sacrificing slavers who managed to reach the space age. While this was no problem, considering that Mir Ura was famous for allowing those race fanatic Chur to continue their devastating path, citing that our role is of protectors and not to intervene in mortal affairs. The deity they worshipped was something that made them dangerous to all of humanity in Morar. Thus, the High Council sealed their fate and planted evidence to show that the Cheer Empire did this, though the Cheer wear it as a badge of pride.
So they fear that the David god could be a threat to Earth?
Yes. I looked at the sky. This time, fear is far worse than that time, at least after reading these logs. This time, this is happening to this planet where we live. Nera yawned. He took out a vial of anti-sleep serum from his utility pouch and opened it.
So where is Nexer?
Well, I guess we can go to Mamjul next, see how their court and religion works. Then we can visit the Nulkan state, I said before getting up. Both me and Nera engaged our suits for flight and ascended to the heavens, moving towards our next target over the jungles and the rivers, over fields and plantations, over the realm that was called Davon. An engaging start. Let's see how it continues in Part 2. Ojhi and the Jungle of Daevas, Part 2. Note: following story contains certain topics like slavery and violence. On the 5,782nd year since the sacred covenant Maharaja made with the Scarlet, 200 years after Shinnok became the inseparable part of our empire, Tenhau Mirhan was born to the noble house of Mirhan, Potna, of all who dwell at Kastuni, somewhere in southern Shinnok. He was the result of the young and irresponsible love of Jahani Mirhan, the heiress and a Shinnaki slave. Despite this, the Mirhan welcomed the young boy as one of their own, a Daeva. Tenhau grew up into a strong warrior, a great spear thrower, and a good scholar. He trained with the best warriors of the Devon, and by the age of 15, he had the strength of an elephant. He composed several songs in the glories of the empire, and most of all, he was adored by all, Daeva, slaves, and free Nulkan, his father's people. He pacified many slave revolts in the south of Shinnok, and inspired free men to leave their barbaric ways and join the Devon. However, in the north, rebellion broke out under a person called Ayun, a liberator who preached about a false god, Yaldo. He massacred several Devon and created a separate Nulkan state, Tenhau, at the age of 23, took a legion, and marched to the north to crush the revolt. He, however, first chose the way of talking, trying to convince Ayun to give up his destructive ways, but to no avail. And thus the war began. Ten Hao, like a mighty warrior, massacred several Nulkan warriors, killed their flesh beasts using the magic blessed to him by the Scarlet, and defeated Ayun and his false god. Ten Hao beheaded Ayun and brought his head back for all to see. Rajmata Urshamitra, pleased with him, blessed him and waived the taxes from his family. Ten Hao was supposed to inherit the largest share of his family's wealth due to his achievements, but just after his victory, Jahani married Ornamu, the third born of the Ursh clan of Meghari. Ornamu was jealous of Ten Hao, for he was the next head of the Mirhan family, and not Ornamu's future offspring, and he himself was considered a failure back in his home, his only virtue being his beauty, which fetched the Ursh clan a handsome amount of fortune as groom money. He could not tolerate that his stepson held more prestige than him, a son of a slave holding more power than a full-blooded Daeva. Thus the man plotted Ten Hao's demise, one day bringing him to the distant forest for a hunt with a few Nulkans who had once followed Ayun. There they stabbed Ten Hao while he was looking into a rabbit's burrow. They stabbed him again and again until his body turned cold. Ornamu, however, a trickster he was, blamed it on the Nulkan, and convinced the ignorant masses of his innocence. The wrath of Daevas fell on the Nulkans. The free were enslaved, and the enslaved were worked to death. A year passed, and Ten Hao's body rotted in the forest, being a feast for carrion feeders, until one day the false god Yaldo's attention fell on him.
Thou wert the one whom killed mine prophet, and caused mine people to suffer and mow. Thou stole mine people's chance to be free, now thou shalt deliver them to freedom.
Thus said Yaldo, and he resurrected Ten Hao, giving him a new body, an immortal body, made from decaying flesh of his own. Ten Hao looked at the false god in shock. The carrion god was a soul-sucking abomination.
And say to thy people to let mine people have I freedom, so that they may live their lives. I happiness like I intended them to be.
He gave Ten Hao a staff made from corrupted flesh. Ten Hao left dumbstruck, walking back to his hometown. There he saw the Nulkans, his people, wasting away in slavery. He went to his home only to find Ornamu as the new Ponita. Ten Hao's mother died in grief after her son's death, and Ornamu, through deceit, took over the family and became the new Potna. Ten Hao stood before him, feeling disgust everywhere. His body was rotten, his carrion filled with dried blood and pus, but he was still as strong as he was when he was alive. Ten Hao asked Potna to show mercy on the Nulkans, but Potna refused, giving reason for Ten Hao's death. Ten Hao told everyone next that he was alive, only for everyone to laugh at him.
The dead cannot rise back.
The Potna removed him from the house. Ten Hao went to the house of his comrades to help him, but only found disappointment. They refused to help him, and even said that Nulkans had no worth except that of a slave. Ten Hao went back to Yaldo and told him everything.
The Daevas are an arrogant race. I shall rain perpetual winks on them. Hie and gather all Nulkins. I grant thou an immortal corporal agent, and part of mine power, hey? And empower the Nulkins, and drive the Daevas out.
Empowered by Yaldo himself, Tenhao went next to the Nulkin settlements and began preaching about Yaldo and his grievous mistake of not discovering the fact that the Daevas were no well-wishers of Nulkins, but mere conquerors who wouldn't stop till every Nulkin was exterminated from their lands. Thus, Tenhao decided to resist them and drive them out. He took 4 Nulkins and trained them in Daevic arts, infused with Nulkin carrying magic, and empowered them. They, in turn, continued this cycle with others. Eventually, a massive Nulkin army stood up, grander than the previous one. Tenhao led them and massacred every Daeva except for the treacherous Potna and some of his guards, who fled back to Daevon. Tenhao, on the eve of the day of grand victory, founded the Kalmatkana Empire to remain for an eternity, and sent a messenger to the Rajmata Sirhanuka, who told her on his behalf, I am Ayun, Grand Karsist of Kalmatakana. I extend my greetings to your holiness and petition you to recognize our independence. Together we can work and build wonders on this earth. But say no, and Yaldo's wrath will strike your empire down. And thus, the Daevite-Sarkic War began. Excerpt from Book 4, The Rhine Manuscript, Chapter 17, The Arch-Traitor. By the morning, we had reached the Scarlet City of Mamjul. Unlike most Daevic settlements, which were built on the land, Mamjul was based upon large platforms, kilometers wide. The platform only allowed the mountain to pass through it, covering everything down the valley. A river would flow from the north on aqueducts made from red resin, like the rest of Mamjul was, and would flow through the canals built across the city, with one leading it down the city's surface, while the rest would join in the south, a single great canal ending at the limit of the platform where water would fall down like a giant waterfall. A marvelous sight. There were 5 peaks protruding out, holding the houses of the nobility. The highest peak was at the center, housing the Scarlet Palace, where the Rajmata lived, and the Scarlet's avatar would dream. On the platform were the buildings of the commoners, made from the same resin, while below the platform were trees, huge and thick, red like resin, supporting the entire city. Nur and I was silently watching the spectacle from a peak near the city. Here we are, in the great city of Mamjul. It looks better here than from the satellite, I remarked. Nur engaged the flight and raced towards the city. I, too, did the same. After a few minutes, we landed in the city. The ground was made from resin, but for some reason still unknown to us, it was able to support plant life. The roads were clean, the fruit-bearing trees planted on either side. The houses were less like living trees and more like proper structures made from resin bricks, joined together by a different kind of resin. They were also larger, at least 4 stories high, with the highest at 11 floors. People wore red attire and red jewelry. Maybe this was a command from the rulers of the city. Slaves, however, were no different than any other part of the empire, except they were branded on their right hand with Daevic scripts. We walked on the streets, remaining invisible to others. The city had designated a place for stores to set up, and hawking was banned, enforced by the city's police. On the street only, there were 3 officers wearing tunics with a leather shield strapped to them. The 3 of them wore a helmet made from animal skull and leather. This was the standard uniform of the entire police force, and they carried a large femur bone fashioned into a mace. We reached a turn when the people ahead of us stopped. Several men wearing armor and holding shields and spears marched on the road. singing a song in unison while some played flutes made from bones, of whom I don't dare to think. The procession continued with the Daevas cheering for their warriors, while the slaves remained silent.
"This is a military parade?"
Nir asked me through the comms. Yes, and quite unique. You may never get to see it again this close, I said to Nir, as suddenly a new wave of soldiers marched, holding pikes with heads on them. Ah, shit, I whispered to myself.
"What?"
Bab Deva Heza Sarka, one of the civilians chanted, before everyone else started chanting. The heads were lowered towards the public by the soldiers while they still marched. The Daevites began to spit on their heads. A roar from the elephant stopped the commotion. The beasts with 4 tusks came next. Several people, naked, maimed, and chained to its neck, walked while on top was a mount made from vines bearing flowers. A girl, maybe 18 years old, wore colorful clothes, like a priestess sitting on a throne on the mount. On her lap was the head of a man. People began to cheer again, chanting the phrase again. This civilization, Nir said in a mocking tone. Let's go. I'm done. He flew out towards the palace. The palace was built on top of the peak at the center of the city. To give a comparison, you may think of the main temple of the Aztec Empire. The temple here is the peak, and the palace was above it. A series of steps was built from the ground to the top, and special slaves were available to carry everyone on palkis, though some nobles would have their own slaves carry them on their backs. A basket would be strapped to their backs, and the noble would sit inside. Maybe they had trust issues with the public service. We, however, made it through our flight suit. I landed as Nir was already walking inside the Crimson Palace. I followed him. The palace's interior was ornate with calligraphy, murals, and jewels planted on the walls. The halls were filled with guards wearing ornate leather armor and carrying spears and clubs. The courtiers were walking, and we decided to follow them. In the next 15 minutes, we walked through halls with ceilings filled with murals depicting Daevic history, their god Scarlet, and finally all the glories they had achieved till now. We entered the hall, which was even larger and more magnificent. The court was built with the same red resin, but was decorated with the skins of various animals. On one end of the hall was the throne of Rajmata, while on the other side was an open gate, allowing people to enter. Some strange birds were sitting on the ceiling. We both went to Rajmata's throne and stood near it while the courtiers filled the hall. Beside the Rajmata's throne, there were 6 more on either side, lower than her throne. The wall behind Rajmata's throne was decorated with a lion's skin, 2 human skulls on either side, and finally a giant rifle fixed at the top. Rifles? Nir was puzzled, but I was not. They were Ladronian rifles. Maybe the ones Saronites stole millennia ago when they ransacked the city. Emotions overflowed me for a second. Grief. Her face flashed in front of my eyes. Everyone stood up, while the soldiers raised their spears and hit them hard against the floor. Rajmata entered the hall with 5 more women. Everyone lowered their heads. The 5 ladies passed us and took their seats. They were wearing the same clothes that the girl with the elephant from before was wearing. Rajmata had a shawl made from tiger skin to distinguish herself from others.
"So, are they rulers?"
Nir asked me. Yes, they're sitting at the center of the hall. I think the middle one holds the most power, I explained as someone else entered the court. The young girl entered the hall, excited. Everyone cheered as she rushed to the Rajmata, who welcomed her with a warm embrace. Rajmata then stepped forward as other women stood up and announced that the young girl, who was a bride of the Scarlet King, had won an important battle against the Nulkans, whom they called Sarka, rebels. She slew one of the companions of the arch-enemy, Ayun, and gave a massive blow to the Nulkans. Everyone cheered again, chanting her name, Vam Maniz. 2 vines sprouted out of the ceiling, one holding a roll of paper. They lowered and then spread the roll open, showing the map of the Empire with the territory marked in red, showing the Nulkans. A 3rd vine came down, holding a pen, followed by 2 more holding inkpots. The vines started changing the map, showing a reduction in Nulkan territory and an expansion up in the north. Rajmata explained that the Nulkans were fleeing up north, somewhere they called Adatum, and assured their demise. The Nulkan rebellion at that time was still very new, yet it managed to spark hope in the slave caste for their incoming salvation. This news would surely have broken their morale. Just after the announcement, a man entered wearing ceremonial clothes, with a boy walking with him. The boy was only wearing a cloth around his waist. His face was sad, but nothing else. He was branded, along with a heavy necklace around his neck, bearing symbols. His hands were tied up. Rajmata announced a special sacrifice for Maniz's prosperity, as Nir turned back and stomped out, gaining the attention of some bystanders, including one of the bridesmaids. Luckily for them, it was akin to a ghost stomping. I followed him out of the court before grabbing him by the hand. Nir, stop roaming around like...
Ojhi Mana, I can't take this anymore, Nir shouted at me. These are the most horrible people I could have ever encountered. They do horrible things like this, like it means nothing.
Nir, you have to understand that their moral standard is different from ours. We can agree or even protest against this, but we cannot just paint them evil because of this.
Ojhi Mana, with all due respect, you are wrong. These people are evil and deserve to be exterminated.
Nir said this and walked away. I could not have said anything. It was his first time, and this kind of experience would affect him like it did. I could not relate. After all, my first experience was completely different. I decided to leave Nir alone for now, and started looking at the place, entering various rooms, including the kitchen, slave quarters, storerooms, and even private rooms, just to get something important. Eventually, after searching the entire place thoroughly for hours, I found 3 men walking out of a chamber. One picking up a plank to seal it. I quickly went inside before the door was closed. The chamber was foggy, and my suit's sensors registered a large amount of narcotics present in the air. 3 priests, fully covered in clothing, were chanting in a low voice, like a lullaby. I made my way through, nearly bumping into a brazier. There were 3 of them, each in front of a priest. I continued before reaching the center of the room, and I bumped into something. It was huge. I switched to night vision. Despite the smog in the room obstructing my view, there was a tree with a large base. Its trunk went up to the ceiling and went out through a hole. There was wet soil beneath my shoes. What is this? I thought. The tree was normal at first, but when my eyes went down to its roots, the next thing caught me off guard. A man was entangled in the roots. Only his head and right arm were out. The rest were inside the tree. Was this the avatar of Scarlet? I took a step back. I had been around the galaxy before this, and even now go around. I saw a lot of bizarre things, but this was one of the most bizarre. The man was sleeping peacefully. It was impossible. No one could even breathe in this state. I took a deep breath and took out a multi-tool. Olem's multi-tool is not your average tool. Made from nanites, it can become anything you need, from a can opener to a pistol. I just took out a diagnostic tool to send data back to Olam for study. The tool was crafted in seconds, a simple oval body with a needle. I carefully kneeled down and poked the needle inside the exposed part of the neck of the avatar. On the visor, data was shown while simultaneously being transmitted to my home. The readings were shocking. The avatar was in a deep sleep, but brain activity was unusually high, like he was having a lucid dream. I broke the needle, with the outside end turning into a transmitter, continuously transmitting data to us. Now I made the multi-tool change into a thermodynamic detector, and again stuck it inside the neck at a different position. The detector started sending readings, and this time, results were expected, at least by the Daevas team. The avatar was the source of magical energy, and was the source of power for the Daevas. This was talked about by the Daevas themselves in their songs, prayers, and stories. The main work was done. All that was left, for me, was to wait for the door to open. After 16 hours, the door finally opened as 3 men entered. I silently left the chamber. Walking through the labyrinth-like halls of the palace, I felt like I was lost. The interior was well decorated, murals depicting heroes of the Empire. They were well sculpted, like they were looking like they were alive. It is such a shame that the technique, at least on Earth, no longer exists. I continued my walk, awing over the murals until I heard a giggle. A huge door in the middle of the hall was ajar. My curiosity took over, and I sneaked inside. The door led to a large bedroom, the size of a small house. The entire place was filled with the fragrance of varied flowers now extinct. The room was open from one side, extending to a balcony, while translucent curtains were placed to keep the fragrance in.
My lady.
I looked to my right. On the bed, the same slave boy we saw at the court before was standing in front of the bed, while the bride, Vam Mains, was sitting on the bed.
I am here now to serve you.
The boy said it very formally, his eyes down to the ground, before kneeling.
No one is here to remind you.
Vam smiled. Suddenly the boy looked up, relief all over his face as he got up.
Vam, you witch. Branding hurts.
The boy touched the area.
Shit, do slaves really go through this?
Yes. It looks good on you, though, Vam complimented him. The boy suddenly lunged at her, playfully fighting with her.
Remember, they can punish you. Now you are a slave.
The boy stopped and laid down next to her.
Tell me, how did you slay, Carvilgar?
Nah, the animal was already beheaded by the time I reached. I just took the head and showed it to everyone, and I'm a hero. Vam laughed, joining the boy.
How did you become a slave, Huranzo? Bribed a mage to turn a slave boy into me to fool my family into believing that he was me and I came here. Thanks to your friend, I wasn't transported to a sacrificial pit,
Huranzo said.
So, Vam, how is life as a bride to our king?
Marriage to a bloody tree is the least desirable thing you can have, she said.
Hey, let's slow down. He is our god,
Huranzo said with concern.
Huranzo, don't be scared. That tree's dead.
All of this is elaborate bullshit, Vam said before getting up again, this time putting her hands on either side of the boy's head and leaning down.
That tree is nothing in front of you. You are my real husband.
I turned around, not really interested in love life, except maybe for a grave error in my misunderstanding of the announcement. The boy was maybe supposed to become a concubine of Vam rather than a sacrifice? I mentally slapped myself. How did I make such a trivial mistake? The giggle of the young couple was suddenly taken over by an ominous Noise. Like an alarm. Their tone shifted from delight to dread as I heard footsteps moving across the room. I turned around to see both now outside on the balcony, looking down. I joined the unaware couple and looked down. The palace was quite high, making it difficult to see the city below. But that was not needed. Not because of the camera in my visor, but because of blue beams flashing for seconds at a street. The flash is the signature of our weapon. "Take this, you bloody savages!" Nir screamed at the top of his lungs as he fired his weapon, releasing blue plasma on the Mamjul police, which charred their skin and flesh, leaving only bone at the point of impact. 10 unfortunate souls had already martyred on the ground, while a Daevic priest curled herself up near the door of a house on the side of the street, whimpering and sobbing. "Come and fight! Not a helpless slave, huh? A real man is standing in front of you, yo!" Nir was cursing them in Olamese. "Nir, what have you gotten yourself into?" I sighed, before looking up at the sky and at the moving bright spot the size of a needle tip. "Shit." "End this commotion!" The order came, and I jumped down on the street, disengaging my cloaking mechanism. Nir just burned down 3 more to their deaths. I looked at the priestess, she looked up at me. I retracted my visor. "Preparing for the jump," another voice said. "I'm, humbly sorry for this, Your Grace," I said in my broken Daevic before walking up to Nir as he burned his last victim down. "You all will burn! Come here and take it!" Nir shouted as I placed my hand over his shoulder. "Jump," I said, and our surroundings morphed from the cityscape to brightness and finally to the mountainous region, kilometers away from any civilization. "What?" Nir turned back to look at me. "Ojhi mana?" "We teleported to Continent 4, more precisely Alaska," I sternly said to him. There was some anger in his eyes. "Agent Nir," Mirror Yan said. "Report back to us back at Olam. Eins Mana demands your immediate presence." High Mirror Eins is the de facto ruler of Olium, and the oldest man alive in the galaxy. While mostly remaining behind the scenes, even for other high counselors who are not interested in regulating the lives of Olamese, he is still the only form of authority that even the most freedom-loving anti-government persons fears disobeying. I believe that he saw Nir doing his mess back there. Nir was a goner, for sure. Nir stomped his legs in defiance before starting to walk away. "Screw you all!" he shouted before he ran away down the hill we were standing on. "Mirror, may I talk to him first before sending him back?" I asked. "In isolation?" "Granted, but abort the mission now. The data you have sent us is enough. The council will convene tomorrow." The command went offline as I began to walk, preparing to walk a large distance to find the boy, but good for me, he was just a few meters away, sitting down on the icy ground, silent. "Nir," I said as I walked over to him and sat down on a large rock lying next to him. "Go away," Nir muttered. "What was that back at Mamjul?" I asked Nir. "I was just saving a child from those monsters." Nir looked up at me. "I fucked up, right?" His visor was down, and tears were falling from his eyes. "They will track that child down and do all kinds of horrible shit to him, since I messed up." "You are getting punished for that stunt." "To hell with it, Ojhi!" Nir looked at me, his tearful eyes now turning red. "I'm sorry, but I am not like you. I cannot be a mute spectator to this atrocity." "I guess that is true." I took out another cigarette for me to smoke. I looked at Nir again, as he was wiping his tears off. "Want one?" "No." Nir said it again, though his voice was not firm enough. "Take it. Your lungs aren't going to die if you smoke once." Nir looked down for a second before, without looking at me, he took the lit cigarette from me. I got myself another as Nier began to cough.
Goodness, how do you even consume it? It's hot.
Nier took the cigarette off, puffing smoke out of his mouth. I laughed. You will get used to it.
So, what will happen to me?
Nier asked about his fate, though there was no fear or regret in his voice. He really was ready to die for what he believed, something for which I admired him. Off to Kirsha. I took another puff as Nier was looking down at the ground. Sadness was all over his face. Nier, I understand this was too hard for you to take in. It was for me when I was in the Imperium, when I watched millions butchered for the glory of the Prophet Emperor. I wondered why Merer Ura even defended them. They deserved to be exterminated for what they did over the last 100,000 years. My cigarette burned away, and I threw its butt off. Then I listened to Merer Ura's speech on this issue to the council. You should listen to it too. It's in the library. Our seniors have also left a wealth.
Fine, I will, Ojhi Mana.
So, where was I? The speech. The effect of smoke started taking over. Merer Ura was debating with Merer Yan over the fate of the Imperium. Yan said that they were the epitome of evil and must be removed from the galaxy. Else, they will ruin it. You know what Merer Ura said? He looked at me, curious. Olemsi spend most of their time in the digital realm, including Yane, doing heinous stuff I cannot even speak about.
What the hell? Is this even related to the Imperium?
Yane personally sends billions of simulated humans to a fate worse than death for giggles.
This means nothing. This is in the digital realm.
Yane said this too. Merer Ura replied that they are lifelike and capable of feeling pain. Why haven't we shut this madness down already?
But they aren't real. They're just bits of data.
That, my friend, is the problem. We never saw those lifelike sentient simulated humans as equals. With what right will we judge those people? The Cheer Imperium sadly sees all humans not sharing the trait of silver hair as nothing more than animals, but that will never warrant extermination. Nier tried to open his mouth, but could not utter a word. Evil and good mean nothing. This genocide is just the ultimate expression of war and resourcefulness and personal welfare, of greed and lust for violence. Something we, Olemisi, also have. We are neither anyone to judge civilizations, nor is this our task. The Imperium is not invincible. Someday a bigger fish will arrive. Will you then ask us to kill those too? I know that it is difficult to see such a war against life and against gods, but that is what we are, ultimately. Territorial beings who seek to have more resources. We add philosophy, social theories, and faith to make this thing digestible for the masses. We have no right to punish people for things fundamental to their nature. I ended my quoting as Nir's mouth was open. He bowed his head, lost in deep thought. I took another cigarette to smoke, tired from my small talk. Minutes passed as I took 7 puffs off.
Ojhi Mana, I can understand what Merer Ura was trying to say.
He looked down.
But I disagree. I believe that we cannot just let these violent cultures exist so freely.
He got up on the ground, looking at the moon, and said,
We may be imperfect, but we are the ones who got the mandate to rule this galaxy and protect it. We are superior to all of humanity, and we must show them the proper path.
Nier, our job is to keep humanity safe from self-destruction and extragalactic threats, not to solve their problems, I said.
No, Ojhi. We have a moral duty, as the most powerful race of humans, to stitch a path for them to follow.
The words that came out of his mouth took me aback.
After hearing Mirror, I now understand what is wrong with Daevas. They are but children, unenlightened beings who need to be taught what it is to be civilized.
Nier, you are now promoting colonialism. The entire point of the speech was to show that there is no correct standard of civilization. The good and bad are ultimately relative.
I agree. But you agree that we should aim for a state where suffering is minimal for everyone. That can be achieved if we put in the effort. You said we are supposed to protect humanity from self-destruction. What kind of self-destruction? That they don't snuff off every star in the galaxy? Or that vile ideas like I saw in Mam Jewel, where they ripped a child from his mother's arms to be sacrificed and eliminated before they become widespread?
Before I could answer, the light from above engulfed us as our ship started descending. The change Nier showed in just a day shocked me. How can someone who was interested in learning about different cultures start advocating to destroy them if they don't fit a standard? I wish I could have talked to him about this in the future. We came back to Olam, as Nier was taken to the High Council, where he was punished by being sent off to Kirsha, the supermassive black hole at the center of Morar, to watch over the main terminal from where protectors were controlled. However, Nier then disappeared without any trace and was never found again until this date. I wondered where he even went. Maybe he went to a primitive world to create his utopia, but I believe he only found disappointment. The very idea of a utopia is nonsense. Even Oleum, with the life of pleasure it gives to its citizens, only amplifies some problems others do not have. The next day, I debriefed the council, which then voted to let the Daevites stay since there were no threat to us or humanity as a whole. They were just too weak for that. I was worn out due to this task, so I decided to fetch myself a drink. The Olam's taverns were a hub of hedonism, and my life spent outside made me allergic to it. Thus, I decided to take it from within the HQ. I entered the small bar, which was filled with agents, young and old, chatting with each other about their tasks and other stuff. I wished Nier was there. I wanted to have him meet with people who would have proved useful for his future endeavors. But that was fate. I sat at the counter before ordering an Ernan, or the equivalent of beer for me. The waiter slid the glass to me as I took some sips of it, refreshing my body.
One more.
A familiar voice reached my ears as I looked to my right. A woman slumped over the counter, drunk and her face in an everlasting agony. Saiton? I recognized her. She was an agent I trained a couple of centuries ago.
Ojhi.
She tried to sit straight up, though the alcohol was impeding her from doing it. She, with great struggle, maintained a dignified posture.
Good day.
I thought you were dead. Saiton was nearly 300 years old and was done with life. I remembered she gave a farewell party a couple of weeks ago, though I was out of Oleum at the time, thus missing seeing her one final time.
I was for a good while.
She gave a weak smile.
Till Mirror Ura woke me back up, saying that I messed up some reports and he wants me to correct them. By the gods, they are back-breaking. I want to be dead again. This is crushing my soul.
I giggled with piteousness at her as she gave me the same.
Can you help me?
Of course, dear, I said, putting the glass down. Saiton tried to push herself up from the counter, though she slumped back. I held her left arm and put it back behind my neck, helping her stand. She must have drunk a jar of ear. Dragging her, we left the bar and returned to our important duties. Poor Nier. Perhaps, if he had been able to stomach the atrocities, he might have been able to make a change to the system in time. Our next work is a gallery piece based off of this time period. Some illustrations from the Chronicles of the Daevas. The Chronicles of the Daevas is a manuscript containing the recorded history of the Daevite Empire from its inception in 11,000 BC to its destruction by the Fulad army, the Mechanites, around 5,500 BC. The Chronicles were recorded by several authors in the language Daevic Barhan. It contains 6,000 pages. The original manuscript has 6 copies, with the first found in the ruins of Rakhigari in the year 1970. The rest were found around the globe, with the latest found in Spain, with claims that the book originally belonged to a Spanish noble who bought it from a Mexican treasure hunter who in turn found it at a Mayan ruin around 1820. The book is written in a script seemingly an ancestor of the Indus script, and thus became a Rosetta Stone for archaeologists, strengthening the theory that the Indus Valley civilization was a successor state of the Daevic Empire. However, later analysis showed that both spoke a very different language, and IVC seemingly just took the Daevic script and modified it according to their needs. The Book 3 was found at the ruins of Old Aditum, Manchuria, in 1889, also called the Manchurian manuscript, by a Nulkan Amur Z, and was kept at the New Aditum Library for 101 years before being handed over to the Nine Shields. The Manchurian manuscript is a bilingual text. Each Daevic line is followed by a Nulkan translation, and it contains illustrations with captions containing context. This makes the manuscript have an additional 2,000 pages. Here are some of the illustrations. The first is an illustration of a Daevic slave named Daz Hari. Trained as a hunter by his Ponita, the slave was one of the finest hunters of the Daevan. Thus, his Ponita gave him a cloth to wear around his upper body, a sign of upliftment among the slaves of Devon. The second illustration is a priest initiate. She was chosen by a priest of the Scarlet. She will face several trials throughout her time as a priestess, and if the Scarlet smiles on her, she may become one of the brides of the Mashara, the avatar of Scarlet, or, if fate allows, the Rajmata. The next illustration notes, Sarkics are the savages who live in Shinak. They are a race of barbarians who worship a false god called Yaldo, and do magic with corrupted carrion. They bring forth abominations that one cannot even dream of. Several in Devon wanted nothing less than the extermination of the Sarkic race. This one, however, is a simple foot soldier. This illustration is of the arch-traitor Ayun, a Deva with Sarkic blood, turned his back on the Empire and joined the ranks of Yaldo. He led a revolt against the Empire in vain. He and his ilk faced the wrath of Scarlet, and like the cowards they were, they fled to the dark city of Aditum, up in the north. This illustration is of Rajmata Barishmutra, the first wife of the Scarlet Maharaja, and our current Rajmata. Her throne is decorated with engravings. One on her right showing our history when we were simple tribals, strong but illiterate tribals. and one on her left showing our present, the only civilization on this earth unrivaled by everyone. Above her throne is an astra procured by us during our war with the mountain dwellers. Its days are gone now. It has deteriorated into a showpiece, but at its prime, it was a force to be reckoned with. The next illustration is of the Scarlet Maharaja, avatar of the Scarlet God. He was once a man in flesh who lived in the forests of Devon, when it was an uncivilized land. He made a pact with Scarlet and became an invincible entity in the form of a tree. The red stone in his crown is a witness to this covenant. Now he dreams of a place where our god and dead dwell. He is the soul of every Deva, the source of our power, and the immortal sovereign of our eternal empire. The following illustration depicts a mechanite grunt, people who have fallen into the lowest rung of their society. The beggars, criminals, sinners, blasphemers, or conquered are ripped off from their humanity into an unceasing and agonizing servitude to the demon Mechane. They do the simplest and most monotonous work to maintain the crawling city of Amani Ram, and to perform repairs to the properties belonging to both the public and the nobility. Next is an illustrated depiction of the Kiraz, the undead soldiers of the Bumaro, ruler of Amani Ram. For the denizens of the city, no matter the rank, amount of wealth, or virtue, their ultimate fate would be to become Kiraz. The priests of the demon take a Mechane, man or woman, old or child, before dying, and perform unholy rituals, trapping the soul within the body, and turning the body into a metal abomination. Armed with a blade and a ray bow, these are the most formidable warriors on this earth. No spirit beast, a sarkic abomination, or even the Astras of the Northerners could harm them. The Mechanites, or as they were known, Fulad, originally lived on the triangular peninsula between Devon and Phi. They were a race of barbaric, charcoal-skinned nomads who would periodically raid and pillage the Urbane people, who inhabited the much larger peninsula of Yarkush, till the day when Devon nearly exterminated them on the verge of our war with Sarkics. The demon, Mechane, fell from the heavens and made a covenant with a single Fuladi boy, Aaron, and his wife, Minka, and thus was born Amani Ram, an insect-like city. Amani Ram became the first Bumaro, and with his people and the newly found demon and its city, he attacked Devon during our war with Urbane. We were pushed back from Yarkush, while Amani Ram enslaved Urbane. Rajmata Sir Bahanimini sent her best men and mages to destroy this new threat. With great struggle, we pushed Amani Ram into the cursed desert of Phi and built a great wall over their former homeland to keep them out of Devon. For 1,000 years there was peace until the wall was torn apart by Amani Ram, who, now having given birth to 2 more smaller crawling cities and absorbed much of the denizens of Phi, attacked Devon again. The time of ending began. Bumaro Hamiz Avrin, the city's ruler during the time of the end, was only 16 when he ascended to the throne. The Bumaro is not the fleshy body that gives direction to the city. The Bumaro is the soul of the city, sitting next to the demon. Hamish's soul inhabited the city and its war machines, guiding every Mechanite, commanding every Kiraz, and holding godlike powers while his mortal body was taken care of by priests. Due to the nature of this transfiguration, the oldest child becomes the heir, while the younger sibling produces a new one. Demon Mechane, Lord of Corruption. The cause of all the suffering that happened to Devon, This is the replication of a mural of a warrior of Daevas found inside Amani Ram during the Battle of Upsa, showing the event of the unholy covenant. At the center is the demon. On the right and left are Arin and Minka, the first rulers of Amani Ram, and at the bottom is the representation of the Mechanite race, all shackled to this evil. The Mechanites began their assault on our empire, massacring our people and burning our cities down while reverting our slaves back into primitive animals in their twisted form of mercy. As our western half burned to cinders, the cursed city of Amani Ram started crawling towards Mamjul. What remained of our army at the west fell back to the Scarlet City while men were summoned from the east. In this bleak time, help came from the place we never even expected. Grand Karsist Ayun arrived with his army of well-trained men and abominations, hardened by war with tribes in the frozen wastelands of the Baikal. The Sarkics came to our aid, not because they harbored any likeness for us, but because of the threat of Amani Ram. They arrived not to save Mamjul, but to save Aditum. On the eve of the siege, Rajmata, Vasili Raj, Shirat, and Ayun rode on a flying abomination, looking at the city of Amani Ram before the war. The first gallery piece we have seen in our exploration together, but it was quite a refreshing one. There is one more we have to show, but since it's more specifically a visual piece, we will have it displayed to the side of the screen during the interview. Speaking of which, let's begin. So we were unable to get a over-call interview with Dr. Nepalwala, but we were able to get questions to him, which he politely answered for us. So, I'm going to be asking the questions for my part in this voice, and answering the questions for his part in this voice. So, why do you use the username Dr. Nepalwala? Okay, so this goes back to 2021, when I first came to know about SCP and that it was a place to write stuff I liked. I immediately wanted to join. Now, when the question came for the username, I wanted a name with the suffix Wala, since I liked the surname. Wala roughly translates to from. Now, for the Nepal part, I like the nation of Nepal. It is mountainous, its Hindu culture is great. I always wanted to visit the place, and I hope someday I will. So I chose Nepalwala, which means from Nepal or resident of Nepal. As for Doctor, I just took it, since many on SCP use the title. And then for the next question, originally I thought the language in some of your works and about me was Hindi, apologies. But after looking into it further, I found there was Maithili and Urdu, I believe. Based on the use of Maithili in your work, I assume it is your native language. If this is the case, what is it like writing in a secondary language? How often do you retranslate your work, and do you get assistance from others in doing so? If it isn't the case, why do you occasionally write using these languages? And the response was, actually, it is Hindi. I believe that there was some mistake. I know Urdu and Bengali, though I cannot read the script, but not Maithili. As for writing in Hindi, let's say I like to represent some part of my culture online. I believe, apart from me and Avali, there are very few Indians, non-diaspora, on either of the sites. The internet culture is not that strong in India, though more people are knowing about SCP and thus Wanderer's Library too. I would like more Indians to come on the site and write for it, and maybe even create an Indian site hosting articles from any of 22 scheduled languages, Nepali too. Till then, I will write bilingual stuff. For now, I will keep it rare since it is difficult to type in Hindi. The Varnamala is huge, and English keyboard does not help much. I may publish another in the future. As for help, Avonlea helped me with the one I wrote. Next is the questions on the works themselves. First, ashes. This appears to be a part of a larger fantastical world. Did you have that larger world in mind when creating a story, or did it simply come as a byproduct of telling the story you told?
Ashes is my first work in Wonder's library. Also, the one I wrote in haste. It is based in the world of the Last Light canon, where I wrote about a boy who mines at the waste outside the island for his younger surrogate brother. Though I forgot to add it to the hub, and so it remained a standalone.
Next is about Notice Timekeeping. A work from Vitalis LLC, a canon I do quite enjoy. What made you write about Vitalis, and why particularly the Timekeepers?
The Vitalis LLC is basically a triple S canon where it was originally a prompt by Malice and then was developed into a world. I was involved in its development, so it is obvious for me to write a story in it. Now for the Timekeepers. The realm we imagined was dark and bleak, with workers working day and night to create commodities. I don't know for whom, we never decided, at least I believe. But for how long? When I first sat to write a story on this world, I realized there was no time system. So, after thinking, I decided to write about the workers, whose work it is to see what time has passed. Now, at first, I was going to write about a giant clock they maintain, but then suddenly the idea of a lever stuck. A lever goes to and fro and can be timed. One thing led to another, and I penned the legend of a worker who tried to challenge the sovereigns and ended up becoming a clock for others. I wanted it to be a dark comedy lore, so I took a notice format. Also, since I was in 12th standard at the time and was preparing for my English boards, which had notice making.
The next question is about Ojhi and the land of Orthothans. The first of 3 works involving Ojhi and his explorations of other civilizations. In this story, he appears to have integrated with the local populace as an open spy inside the Orthothan civilization. Why did this role change from an open infiltrator in the Orthothan story to an invisible spy in the Daevas stories?
In the story, Oleomasi didn't feel threatened by the Orthothans, since an alien was leading them, so they already knew to some degree about the Noctan and that the Milky Way belongs to them. Also, they were harmless to Olam, in technology-wise. At first, the Deva, being invisible, is a standard protocol, along with being in camouflage while also taking care not to reveal themselves to the Scarlet King. They didn't have any ideas of how powerful the Scarlet King was. Outside the story, in the first story, I wanted to create the character of Ojhi, how he interacted with Orthothans, and the effects of immortality. In the second one, I wanted Ojhi to be the neutral observer, exploring the Daevic civilization.
The next question is about Ojhi and the Jungle of Daevas, Part 1. Our first introduction to Ojhi's temporary partner, Nir. Throughout his time, he makes repeated value judgments over the morality of the Daevas' actions and culture, echoing the many situations in real-world history where one group decides what is morally right or wrong for another group. Is there a particular situation you were drawing upon when you wrote this, or was it more about the general philosophical conflict between viewpoints?
It was a general type, though I did take some inspiration from online discussions, including Discord, on empires like Aztecs. Their entire achievements are disregarded, and entire focus is on their human sacrifice, like their entire worth in history is surrounded by that. Also, Rounder's Jade proposal had a part where Gilannis's team were arguing the morality of the Daevic Empire. This too inspired me. When I began writing The Jungle of Daevas, I wanted to tinker with the theme of Daevas being just an empire, doing scientific progress and slavery side by side, and taking the argument, it is bad, these people are complete monsters, and I know that they did things abhorrent for us, but we cannot put our moral lens on them when it was completely normal for their time, in perspective of a newbie and a veteran who was 6,000 years old.
The next question is about Ojhi and the Jungle of Daevas, Part 2. Do you personally as a person apart from being the writer, support Nir's attempts to save the child, or do you hold a viewpoint closer to Ojhi's, of respecting the culture's values?
As a person, yes. I would have saved the child like Nir did.
And then the next question is about the Ojhi series as a whole. Also, do you plan to write more about Ojhi and his adventures? I know that in Orthothans and the Gallery you referenced the Mechanites. Do you plan to cover them or anyone else from this time period, such as the Abominant?
Yes, I have plans to write about Ojhi. For now, though, I wish to cover the Mechanites before moving to world building the Chur and parts of the galaxy. I also would write some stories from other people on Earth, some of other humans, and expand on Nir. As of now, my plan for him is to eventually leave the galaxy and find a Noctan, guarding a way to the library. At least that is a pitch for now, but I will open him up for others to write eventually. Apart from that, Ojhi's series is a part of a larger universe I wanted to write about originally, but then I lost interest and started working on another space opera. You can ask Gattoni. I'm still working on that, so I plan to write enough to give basic bones to the world, and then open it to others to write their own stories based on it. Also, the Abominant does not exist in this universe.
The next is on some illustrations from the Chronicles of the Daevas. Another work with a focus on the Daevas and Mechanites. What caused you to have a particular focus upon these ancient groups from the Wonders Library / SCP canon?
So the Daevas and the Mechanites did fascinate me for a long time, but after Rounder's SCP-001, I decided to give my contribution to it. However, unlike others who usually show Mechanites as good guys and Daevas as bad ones, I decided to do the inverse. I made Daevas, in a way, good guys, while Mechanites as faithless horror run by cosmic mechanical horror gods. I also have a plan to connect Mechane with Noctan, thus deepening the lore. More into my fascination, I like history, especially outside India. I read about the Spanish Empire and Aztecs, Bronze Age, Sumerians, etc., so the Daevas and Mechanites, too, interested me. The anomalous artifacts they left for the Foundation to find, or the second part of Ouroboros cycle. But it reached the peak when Rounder released his SCP-001 proposal, since he gave a lot to develop both factions. Daevas in my story is based on ones in Jade Proposal, though I did end up making them different. Next is on the gallery piece, Me and. A lovely gallery involving yourself and other writers of Wonders Library. Why did you choose to post this to Wonders Library, and for what reason did you choose to share it with us specifically? I like drawing. It is in my blood. Me and is the first gallery I made on the site. As for the theme, there are many friends I made on Wonders Library Discord, so I wanted to give a gift to them. Thus, I made this page to make drawings of them and me. It is like a collage of you with your friends.
And then for the first of the closing questions, what does the Wonders Library mean to you?
Wonders Library is like a paradise for me. It is a place where I can write my heart, and where there are people who want to hear it. I feel happy when I open the Discord and talk with the people there, and when I open the site to read something new. This community is one of the greatest I've found in the ocean of the internet. I may have had disagreements with some over the course of time, but I never felt unwanted here. I wish this amazing site to grow, and more people to notice our works.
And then the last question. Is there anyone you would like to recommend for a future spotlight?
Avonlea. Okay, I have a preference for him since I see him as my younger brother and friend. Avonlea is a great writer and artist. You should check out his works.
Next is Formina, another great writer in Wonders Library. You should hear him out. Then Gattoni. They are also a great writer and cook. You should cover the Lesson and the Mall of America. Finally is Rounderhouse. While I don't have to say that he is already famous on the SCP side for his works, but his works in the Wonders Library are great too. There are many great authors on the site, but I can only think of them right now. And that's all we have time for today, dear Wanderer. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Dr. Nepalwala. It has been an honor being able to work with you on this. And as for the rest of you Wanderers, thank you very much for coming. It has been an honor reading for you. And good luck out there.